Hello everyone, I'm Daniela Rus and I make robots. I'm a robotics researcher at MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, or CSAIL, and also the director of CSAIL. And today I will be moderating this panel on the future of computing. So in this panel, we hope to explore with you some of our latest insights in the challenges that our researchers are tackling in the field of computing. We also will discuss what the future of the digital landscape might look like and how computer science research will make a difference in how we live, we work, and we play in the future. I will tell you more about CSAIL in just a minute. First, I would like to introduce our panelists. Tim Berners-Lee probably needs no introduction, but he invented the World Wide Web 25 years ago in 1989 when he was a researcher at CERN, which is the European Particle Physics Laboratory. And today, Tim is a crusader for a World Wide Web that is of even greater benefit to humanity through easy access to information and through providing more transparency on how governments operate. Andrew Lo was named by Time magazine one of the most influential people of the year for his innovative approach to financial markets. Andrew is an economist by training. He is a faculty member at MIT's Sloan School of Management. He directs the Laboratory for Financial Engineering, and he's also a principal investigator at CSAIL. And Russ Tedrake can make robots that fly like birds, run like ostriches, and these days he's directing his innovative approaches to creating robots that can assist in search and rescue. Russ finds his inspiration in nature, and today he will tell you about what we might expect from the field of robotics and from robots into the future. So I will share with you just a few words about CSAIL, the organization we all belong to. Then we will hear from the panelists, and at the end of their brief speeches, we will open the floor for general questions. So first about CSAIL. We have over 100 senior researchers, that means faculty and principal investigators, and we have over 500 students, that means postdocs, graduate students, and undergraduate researchers. And we are the largest interdisciplinary research laboratory at MIT. We were founded 50 years ago as Project MAC, and since then our laboratory has played a very important role in the technological revolution, starting with the early days of time-sharing computers to the birth of data encryption. Our objective is to teach our students to become world-class computer scientists, to be big thinkers, and to become disruptive innovators that could take the field of computing to the next level and also take on some of the world's most pressing challenges. Our researchers include robotics researchers like myself, as well as experts in all fields of computing: security, mobile, wireless, robotics, artificial intelligence, databases, theory, you name it, we have experts in the field. And because of this diverse range of interests, we are very excited and very well equipped to take on interdisciplinary challenges. And altogether, we imagine a world where computing can turn the world into a better place. We imagine a world where physicians can use the most advanced knowledge on genomics to engineer better treatments that are individualized for patients. We imagine a world where data can help us all make better decisions by predicting the consequences of our decisions. and where the most recent advances in encryption research, for example, differential privacy and homomorphic encryption, put people in charge of their own data. We also imagine a world where robots will be as common as smartphones and cars, and where robots can do everything from helping with search and rescue activities to folding your laundry, which is my least favorite chore at home. So we really believe that computing has a lot to offer in the way our world will be shaped in the future. And with this, I would like to stop and turn it over to Tim Berners-Lee, who will talk to us about the web we want. Tim?
Thanks. So, it's great to be here. Thank you for coming. If you put your hand up, the seat next to you is empty. So there are some seats over here if you need them. Thank you all for coming. Great to be here. Great to be back at South by Southwest. It's 25 years ago that I originally wrote a memo proposing the World Wide Web project. And so I wanted to get all the other guns firing as well. So we got the green light, we got the World Wide Web project I wrote a memo about, and when that was 25 years ago, but I published a memo which had got these scribblings on the front about reorganizing information, and for the first few years it was actually quite difficult to persuade everybody that it would be a good idea, it wouldn't be too complicated, and that they should give out their own proprietary system to open it up, the psychological thing of getting open and putting some of the things on the web. But there were people who got it, and just like now, when you look around, of course, look around South by Southwest, you see a lot of people with a twinkle in their eye because they get the idea of how the world can be different than they're making it. 25 years, I want to ask, what's the web we want? I want to step back. It's very easy for us to use the web every moment. It's only when the Mubarak regime in Egypt turns the web off or other things happen on the web that you realize that actually it's not just like the air we breathe. You actually have to step back and think about what is behind it, and think about whether it's always going to be there, and think about the properties that it's had that have got us this far, and are we going to continue to have them? There are many threats to rights on the web. Only recently people have started to talk about human rights on the web. I mean, human rights were established like pre-web. Don't those work? Well, if you go up in England, you talked about Magna Carta in 1215. In the US, we talked about the US Bill of Rights. If you're brought up in South Africa, then you're probably very proud of your new constitution. It's put together with a very good Bill of Rights. But of course, all these Bill of Rights, none of them mention the internet. And to some extent, we can just demand that those rights we have should exist on the internet. But in fact, it turns out that when you go onto the internet, it turns out that some of the things which you want, like the ability to connect to anybody, okay? Yeah, that's not really, that needs to be called out. Because somebody could tell you, yes, we're giving you connectivity, you can get to these people, you can connect to our partners, to our partner companies. But no, you say, oh, I want to be able to connect to any new upstart company. I don't want to just watch your movies, I want to watch the movies of anybody who has started making a little startup, making an independent film company and so on. There are a number of countries who are putting into their regulation or legislation ideas about the internet being a right. Make sure that you can stop something obviously in the country near you. There are various declarations people got out there. The Declaration of Internet Freedom is one. Check them. You can check those out. You can sign them. And there are people, some of them you might know, some of them might be hanging around South by Southwest, who've signed that Declaration of Freedom. So what does it mean when we talk about rights on the internet? Well, of course, we're talking about sort of the usual things like expressions, pre-expression. That means I don't want to be censored. I would need to be able to get to what I want, and also, as a person, I need to be able to put myself out there so that anybody else can see it in any country. The web grew up as a non-national thing. I don't call it an international thing. International sounds like nations getting together. No. Web grew up irrelevant of nations. It just, the internet was connected up. And where you know, the client and the server, when you connect a web browser to a web server, they have no care, they don't care about national boundaries. That has had some really sweet side effects in the way an international community has grown up. Censorship blocks really messes that up. Doesn't happen, you know, doesn't happen in every country, it happens in different areas. It'll be interesting to keep track of that in the future, but very important to be aware of where it's happening. Access, just ability to access the web. Right now, as of about now, the number of people who've got internet can access the web technically is around 40%. So that is great for the 40%. And the web internet is becoming more and more powerful in lots of ways every moment. And the stuff on it is more and more cool, and it's more and more empowering for people to do their own medicine, have their own medical data. If you were in the previous session, you'll be excited about that. And that's all apply. Also, all these new things you can do on the internet make it more and more powerful, and makes the gap between the 40% who do have it and the 60% that don't have it even bigger. Obviously, for people who don't at the moment, many things get in the way. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's poverty. Sometimes it's illiteracy. Obviously, our hopes are for mobile. In sub-Saharan Africa, in developing countries in general, it is mobile, the mobile web which is taking over. Critical things are the cost of a gadget that can do web, and the cost of the data plan. Not necessarily ultra-fast broadband, but some sort of broadband, something like let me do email, be part of the, browse simple websites, be part of the information society, and be creative myself. I want to be able to, I want people to not just to get on and see the internet that we put together by everybody else. I want people to get on, make it themselves in their own language, so we see more and more stuff in their own language. So, one of the properties of the web is that it's open. That means lots of things. Open means lots and lots of things to different people. Part of it is open standards. Obviously, many of you may have worked on building web standards or following the latest versions of HTML5 and all the APIs and so on. Keeping those open, keeping those royalty free. A really crucial point. The place I worked for in Switzerland, CERN, that lab, after 18 months, we managed to persuade them to actually provide a document which says, you know what, CERN is not going to charge royalties for the web technology. That was a really crucial point in its uptake. Since then, there was a point in the consortium's history when we realized we had to get all the consortium members who are involved in working groups to say also, you know, when we're done with this spec, we are not going to be charging royalties for people who implement the spec. So that's a very important part of it. Another important part of openness, of course, is neutrality of the media. You can be, censorship is when it's sort of blocked. Net neutrality is that it's got to be, it's not just not being blocked, or that's part of net neutrality. Net neutrality is that you don't mess with it. The ISPs, for example, the famous one in Holland, that slowed down Skype because they noticed that Skype was starting to eat into their telephone revenue. Okay, the Dutch turned that around pretty quickly into some legislation that you can't do that. In America, the convention is that internet service providers provide you with connectivity to whoever you want, and they don't slow down packets going to their commercial enemies, but they're always under such tremendous commercial pressure to do so, because they can make such a mint if they can actually get a strangle hold on you as a consumer and just connect who you connect to. So this is the Scientific American's illustrating this picture of the happy life on top and underneath all the people, all the demons trying to get at the workings of the internet and use it and slowing it down for their own benefit. So that's net neutrality is important for many things. I think it's, it's important for the commercial world, for an open market. It's also important for democracy. It's important that you can go onto any political site you like. It's also important for innovation. The fact that you can build a new website and very quickly, one person can write a new program, 2 people can run this program, they can send their packets through the cloud of the internet. By the way, we were using the cloud diagram for the internet long before the cloud beam came along. So why cloud? Because you don't care what's inside it. You can write a program, she can write a program, they can communicate, and a new innovative protocol is born, a new innovative system is running over the web, a new social medium is spreading across the web, for example. That's really important to innovation. So that's what I want to see that happening for the next 25 years. And all this, of course, thank you all for coming here. We know you had alternatives to go where you had Snowden streaming live. And obviously at the moment, this last year, there's been a lot of focus on privacy. It's a shame that it took us certain revelations to get us all thinking about the internet. Obviously, we have to think about to what extent we give the agencies that are supposed to protect us the ability to sample the internet, spy on the internet, and how, I think the really interesting question is how we build systems that will hold them accountable. Checks and balances are traditional in sort of Manchurian government. Checks and balances need to be built like they've never been built before. We need very strong agencies accountable to the public who have the power to go in and investigate the investigators. And we don't know how to build that yet. When it doesn't happen, really important that we can protest, that our websites can go as we can, actually went black, not yellow, but so that was this, Wikipedia went back when the SOPA legislation was going to go through. Also, people went out into the streets protesting SOPA in the US, protesting ACTA in Europe. ACTA was an agreement which was going to give too much power to the copyright holders and nail and take away freedoms from individuals. So this sort of stuff, it's important to be able to do that. There are lots of things you have to be able to go to protest about. Lots of things when actually individual voices have to be added up so that this thing is kept open and free. Those of you who were here last year, we were talking about Aaron Schwartz's life and how he was a huge part of stopping SOPA. Let's keep doing in his memory, keep doing the things. What would Aaron do? So those are some of the things which I think that's on my agenda for the web we want. There is a webwewant.org or web@25. You can go to be involved well, Web 25 is actually going to be live on the 12th of March, which is the normal actual birthday of the web. I want you all to think about what sort of a web you want. I want you to not just think about it, I want you, when necessary, to take action. Make sure that by the end of the year, we know what sort of legislation has got to be enacted, in which countries, in all of your countries, what sort of pressure has got to be put on the companies when necessary, what sort of spirit we want behind the web that we're going to have for the next 25 years. Thank you very much for your time.
Next, I would like to turn it over to Andrew Lowe, who will talk to us about big data, Big Brother, and the financial crisis. Andrew.
Thank you.
Also, while we get the slides set up, I want to start by thanking Daniela Rus and my other colleagues at CSAIL and the organizers of South by Southwest for inviting me to participate in this great panel. I have to admit that as a financial economist, I feel a little bit out of water and intimidated because, well, if you look at the composition of the panel, we've got two of the leading roboticists of our generation and the inventor of the internet and me. So, who ordered that? But, you know, when I told a friend of mine that I was coming to South by Southwest to be on this panel, he was very jealous and said, why are you going? Isn't South by Southwest all about disruptive innovation? And I have to say that absolutely, and financial economists belong here because at least the first half, we've got down. Finance has been incredibly disruptive. And so what I want to talk about is what do we do about it? How do we deal with the challenges of a financial crisis, and particularly big data, and the privacy issues that Tim mentioned. So I'd like to start by talking a bit about what we know of the economy. And it turns out that there's actually quite a lot that we know. If we actually take a look at the data that we have, let me see if I can break this up. Over the course of the last several years, the economy has been going up and down. But within the last few months, it looks like things are actually looking pretty good. So, for example, if you take a look at recent announcements by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, we'll actually bring up the slides in just a minute. Okay. Move it on the other side. Yeah, there we go. So. Yeah, great. So, what do we know about the economy? Well, as I mentioned, we've got a lot of data coming in. So we know that inflation is about 0.1%, unemployment 6.6%, GDP growth 2.4%, non-farm payroll 113,000, housing starts 880,000. The Fed balance sheet is 2.6 trillion. All of these data tell us where we are in the economy. That basically things are getting better, but we still got a ways to go. However, there's a huge part of the economy that we actually don't know much about. For example, hedge funds and the shadow banking system that was central in creating the financial crisis. What do we know about that? Well, let me show you the data that we've collected about hedge funds and the shadow banking sector. This is what we know about it. Nothing. And the reason we don't know anything about it is because there's actually no legal requirements for hedge funds or the shadow banks to report. They're not even actually under any regulatory jurisdiction. And so the old adage goes, you can't manage what you don't measure, applies to this sector. And clearly we want to understand what these data are telling us about that part of the system. But at the same time, a lot of these financial institutions have argued, well, we're developing proprietary trading strategies and investments for our shareholders. And if you believe in private enterprise, you don't want to force us to disclose. After all, you don't disclose Coca-Cola's formula. You want to give people an incentive to develop new innovations. So the question is there some kind of a compromise between privacy and total transparency? And it's pretty clear that there are certain things that have to be kept private. We don't want total transparency. The answer is yes, there's actually a compromise, and it has to do with a new technology. Not so new from the computer science literature, but new in its applications to finance. And the technology is known as secure multi-party computation. Let me tell you what it is with a simple example. I've always wondered what the socioeconomic status is of participants at South by Southwest. So one of the things that I'd like to know is what the average salary is of people in this room. So let me start by asking, anybody want to tell me what their average salary is so we can start computing an average? Yeah, not so much. Well, we obviously acknowledge that salary is quite a confidential thing. So let me tell you what my annual salary is so we can start trying to compute the average in this room. But I'm not going to tell you what my salary is by itself. What I'm going to do is to tell you what my annual salary is plus a random number that I choose and add to my salary. So my salary plus the random number is $15. So hopefully I've added a negative number to my salary. So I'm happy to share that with you, $15. And I'm going to give that number to somebody else in the audience, say Alice. And I'm going to ask Alice to take that number, $15, and add to that her salary plus her random number that only she knows and she chooses. And so Alice does that, and the sum is maybe $37,000. And Alice takes that number and gives it to somebody else who adds his number and his salary and passes it along to somebody else and to somebody else and to somebody else until the last person in the room, Bob, gets the number, and Bob adds to it his salary and his random number. And at that point, the number turns out to be 15 billion, and Bob gives it back to me. I take that number, 15 billion, and I subtract from that my random number. I give it to Alice. She subtracts her random number. She passes it and gives it to the next person who subtracts her random number, and so on and so forth, until Bob subtracts his random number. And at that point, when Bob subtracts his random number, what Bob has is the sum of everybody's salary, which, when you divide by the total number of people in the room, which everybody can see, and is public information, yields the actual salary, the average salary of everybody in the room. Nowhere did anybody have to reveal his or her salary, but at the end of the day, we actually have the average. Now, of course, this algorithm is a pretty simple one in the sense that if I got together with Alice, I could actually cheat and figure out what Bob's salary is. But there are more sophisticated algorithms that allow no cheating to go on and yet permit us to calculate numbers like average salaries or average loan portfolios or average concentration indexes of credit default swaps, things that will tell us what the systemic exposures are of the aggregate economy without jeopardizing privacy. So let me conclude by pointing out that with the right technology, transparency and privacy can both be achieved. You don't have to give it up as long as you have the wherewithal and the right tools to be able to deal with these kind of challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I will turn it over to Russ Tedrake, who will tell us why the robots are coming, or how they're coming.
Yeah, hi there. So it's sort of a cheesy title, The Robots Are Coming. I had to think a lot about whether I was going to use the title, but I feel like there's never been a time before where I would have felt right using the title, and there may never be a time again where I'll feel right using such a cheesy title, but let me tell you why. Robots are trending in such a way right now, just in a massive proportion, that this felt like the one time where I could get away maybe using the title. And maybe it's not even they're coming, but they're actually here. And I want to make sure you guys know the extent to which they are trending. And it happened with a lot of progress in academia and in industry, and then it got quickly spurred on by this massive, relatively massive investment first by the government. So there's a national robotics initiative that happened 3 years ago now, where the robotics community got together, formed a robotics caucus in the Congress, made robotics a national agenda, and produced research money for academic research in robotics. Okay, there's another big, huge, another $80 million or so coming from DARPA that was injected into building robotic hardware in the U.S. You're just seeing many, many more robots moving around, walking around in the United States. It's a worldwide phenomenon. There's all over the European Union has massive funding for robotics. Japan and Korea have been leaders in robotics. Even at MIT, where we've been spending our precious few junior faculty slots filling in with roboticists because we know that robotics is hot. It's hot now. Okay, Google just shocked the world in December, saying that they purchased 8 of the big robotics companies in the last 6 months. Right. So why did all this happen? Why is so much energy? Okay, it's because in the last 5 or 6 years, robots got awesome. You must have seen this before, right? So this is a Wildcat from Boston Dynamics. This is UAVs that are flying around, individually doing amazing things, but collectively doing amazing sort of swarm computations at scale, right? That's at UPenn. This is an airplane that, airplanes don't normally land on a perch. This airplane was developed at CSAIL. It can stall its wings like a bird and land on a perch like a bird. Maybe it will land on power lines to trickle charge its batteries and keep flying, right? And in fact, it's so robust that now we have Joe just throwing airplanes at wires all day long. Okay, manipulation capabilities in robots. The hardware technology that we've got now, this is from Germany, right? This is a just showcase of the robotic arm technology that has matured, the robotic hand technology, able to do relatively advanced manipulation tasks with flair. The sensing capabilities of robotics has been just phenomenal progress. This is a Kinect sensor that one of John Leonard's colleagues, Tom Whelan, is walking through his apartment once with a Microsoft Kinect sensor, PrimeSense sensor. Okay, and after just a single traverse of the apartment, look at the kind of map you can pull out, right? The robots can see now. They can't necessarily understand what they're seeing, but the geometric representation of the world problem is sort of gone away, right? Robots can see the environment. And now robots are going out and taking all these technologies and putting them together and solving hard problems out in the real world. One of the ones that I've been involved in the last year is this project by DARPA, a competition by DARPA, where we had to field robots. They didn't have to be humanoid robots, but we used a humanoid robot that had to go out and handle a disaster response scenario. So this is a scene where they put us in front of a debris pile. We had to clear debris and get through to an imagined door at the end of the debris, okay? But the point is, we didn't set this up and take one video and put it on YouTube. This is a challenge that had to work on game day. We had one shot with the real robot. The robot had some human operators that were connected to the robot with a very degraded network link. So they were allowed to give high-level commands, but they couldn't steer and control the whole robot. And I'll just show you a really quick summary of the kind of things we do. I sped it up so we could, I didn't use too much of my time, but the robot's pretty amazingly capable. In fact, this was a good thing for the bipeds in the world. We just had this big competition in December. Everybody said that the people who are bringing bipedal robots all the robots are just going to fall down and embarrass themselves. But in fact, the robots did very well. The bipeds did very well. This guy happens to be so wide that I don't know if you remember Hans and Franz from Saturday Night Live. It's the only way we could get through the door was going sideways. It cost us valuable time, but that was it. This is picking up a drill, turning it on, and then he's going to cut a shape out of a wall. And these aren't one-offs. These are things that had to work on competition day. This is picking up a fire hose and mating it with a spigot. We can do this sort of in the wild now. Slowly. And DARPA put on this amazing event where they actually rented a NASCAR stadium, the Homestead Speedway, and we had all the 18 most advanced humanoid robots in the world. In each of you could walk down Pit Crew Lane and see all these humanoids and all the most stressed out programmers in the world working on their robots the day before. And they put us through all these competitions, okay? All right, so it's easy to say that and then make you think that robotics is solved, but there's lots of things we can't do yet, right? So the robots today were moving not very gracefully, very slowly. We want them to move like ballerinos, right? I would be happy if our Atlas robot, our big humanoid, had the manipulation capabilities of a 2-year-old, okay? Or a 3-year-old here. To be able to, if I have a factory where I have perfectly specified objects, maybe I'm okay, but if I have unknown objects I haven't seen before, it's still a very hard problem for us. Object recognition, scene understanding, high-level decision making, these are all technical problems that we're going to be tackling in the next few years, okay? But there's big problems with robotics too, like bigger than these sort of one-off research problems. The thing that's going to get robots out of the YouTube world and into the real world is solving problems about robots being too fragile. They fall down, they break, right? It's very depressing when you work that hard on a robot and they break, right? But there's new fabrication technologies out there that, for instance, Daniela is working on that are making soft robots that will be able to recover from. This is one of Daniela's videos of a earthworm robot that she hits with a mallet all the time. Okay? And if we can figure out how to not only build these things, but control these things to be as dexterous as the videos I've been showing you, and that can totally reshape the robotics landscape, okay? Robots are too expensive. We spent millions of dollars on that humanoid robot you saw, and if I want to send them out into the world, we're going to have to make them much, much cheaper, and soft robotics can help with that too. They're using too much energy. The humanoid robot I showed you, actually, the reason it had a tether was because it pulls 15 kilowatts off the wall when it's standing still, right? So if you've seen the Big Dog robot, right? So Big Dog has a 15 horsepower motor, and it's about 1/8 of a horse. So I guess if you do the math, it's about 100 times less efficient than a horse, okay? We're gonna have to solve that if we wanna get them out there, right? We also have to make it easier for people to work on robots out in the field and give them legislation to support this community and foster the environment. Okay, but this is a good time. This is an amazing time for you to get involved if you're thinking about a robotics startup, right? There's never been a better time where there's COTS sensors out there, off-the-shelf sensors, actuators, even robots. The robotics community has finally embraced the open source movement, both for hardware and software. The maker movement has impacted robotics in a major way. You can download plans for entire humanoids now and get involved, right? We just released the entire planning and control infrastructure code base for that humanoid robot I showed. If you're interested in using that, send me an email. I will help you build this because I think this is so important for robotics to get out there. You can use online machine shops. I think if you guys can dream up new consumer applications and we can work together, then we can drive down costs. We can solve really hard problems. And there's never been a more important time for academia to team with industry and other academics to bring in the next wave of robots. Okay, I think we're really entering an exciting era for robotics.
Thank you, Russ. See the enthusiasm that we have for the future and for what computing can do to improve our lives and give us better ways to work, to play, and to live. And so please join us in this enthusiasm and please join us in the Q&A. Let me start the Q&A session by asking each one of our panelists one question. And I see that there are microphones in the aisles. Please join us with your questions. So Tim, you painted this really exciting view for the future of the World Wide Web, for the Web we want. What new technologies might be needed to get to your dream?
Well, so the current state we're at, if you're a web developer, you know that HTML5 is what's different about HTML5 compared to the original web that I started 25 years ago, is that every web page instead is completely programmable. And the power that we're giving, as we give more APIs, like the system APIs, to the web page means that you can program your web page to do anything you can program a computer to. With real-time communication, WebRTC, you could get two web pages or two versions of the same web page run by different users talking to each other without necessarily going through the server. So you can build new distributed applications using peer-to-peer protocols across the internet based on web app technology. So that is happening right now. It's kind of happening in browsers like you. WebRTC is really exciting, and I imagine that will cause people to build really exciting new platforms on top of that. Platforms on top of platforms, web on top of the internet, open web platform on top of the web, and exciting things on top of that.
Thank you, Tim. So in your view of the web, you have articulated the importance of privacy, and that is actually a common theme in your dream and in Andrew's dream. And so let me ask you, Andrew, in terms of this multi-party protocol you have outlined for us, is it used today? In what fields might we imagine using those ideas?
Well, I mean, parts of it are certainly used today because it's based upon ideas that were pioneered by some of the early cryptographers, folks at CSAIL, like Ron Rivest, Shafi Goldwasser, Silvio Vitali, These are giants in the field, and they pioneered a lot of applications. When you use credit card transactions online, you're using part of these kind of encryption methods. Secure multi-party computation, though, where you're allowing individuals to encrypt their data and then share the encrypted data and be able to compute with it, that's really new. And part of the newness comes from the fact that it's only been a few years ago that we solved the problem of so-called fully homomorphic encryption. That's a scary sounding word that simply means that you can encrypt your private data, then give somebody that encrypted data, and they can take that data and compute certain statistics as if they had the unencrypted data, but at no time can they access the underlying data. And you can imagine the applications are huge. For example, not just in financial applications, but healthcare. Imagine if we could share all of our healthcare data to figure out what truly causes cancer or diabetes, but without having to disclose details about our own private medical condition. That's an example where I think it'll transform society if we can only get the technology out there.
So that's really great, and it was very exciting to see in your presentation the collaboration between computer scientists and finance. And I just wonder if you can elaborate just a little bit more on this. Over the past decade and looking forward into the next decade, how would computer scientists and economists come together to solve even more important problems?
Well, you know, more and more, I think computer science is actually getting involved in a number of economic transactions. Actually, part of that is thanks to Tim Berners-Lee in the internet. Of course, e-commerce now is something that we all take for granted. So the idea between computer science, particularly mechanism design, auction theory, and how you construct the better marketplaces for interactions is really coming to the fore. So I think that over the course of the next few years, we're going to see even more powerful algorithms that will ultimately allow us to do a better job of allocating scarce resources across lots of different needs.
So thank you, Andrew. So Russ, before you stand up, I want to ask you a question. I'm very excited about your presentation because you and I share the dream of robots coming. So there has been a lot of talk about self-driving cars recently. Where else are the robots coming? Can you comment a bit about this?
Well, I actually think self-driving cars is a perfect example, right, of both where we need legislation to help, so it makes it easier for people to do the experiments they need to do to make self-driving cars a reality. I also think that, you know, so Google's got the most visible self-driving car project, but all the major auto manufacturers have self-driving car projects. But these cars are driving right now. They're out, they're doing meaningful things, but they're only driving in small scenarios where they have perfect maps, and they really are not, they haven't solved the whole problem. So it's a perfect example of how you can, the robots are at a point today where they can do meaningful work, they can make an impact on people's lives, but there's still really hard technical problems waiting around the corner to field these things in reality.
Thank you, Russ. So please join the conversation. We have a first question. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Alex, programmer from Brazil. Thanks for great inspirational talks.
A little bit louder.
Alex, programmer, Brazil. Okay. My question is around, okay, so 40% of us have access to the internet after all this time. And we're talking about, you know, robots. And I've read that most of the data going around the internet is not human generated anymore. So maybe you guys could comment a bit about the Internet of Things and how the robots on the internet would impact, you know, or maybe even overlap the human access to it.
I'll take the first crack, but then I'll defer to Tim. But there was actually a great panel yesterday at Cloud Robotics, and Daniela brought hats. So here we go. So you got a CSAIL hat for asking the question.
So ask more questions, you'll get hats.
It's a nice hat. It's actually a really nice hat. I had to work really hard to get mine. There was a great panel yesterday on cloud robotics. Google is talking about cloud robotics, and Ken Goldberg from Berkeley. So there's a dream in the field that a robot that has, you know, an individual robot can only have so many experiences. It takes time to have experiences, get data. If we can have many robots out there fielding all the time, they can share experience, they can learn from each other, they can map the world much, much faster, right? They can leverage the compute power of the servers, right? So cloud robotics is a thing. It's happening, definitely.
And for humans too. So a lot of the data out there, people are worried about privacy because they're worried about the data being about them. Well, actually, I'm excited about the data being about me. For me, the value of data, the data about me is to me. So if some marketing person can make some money out of knowing something about my detailed medical history, they will get a certain amount of limited value out of knowing about my demographic. But if me, that's data about me, if it's going to tell me whether I'm going to get a heart attack, what I'm going to die of, so where I'm going to die, so I not go there, then that's more exciting. So my favorite app at the moment is the one that runs on here and tracks my movement just by listening to accelerometer and knows, gives me, now back as far as last October, I've got when I've been running and walking and sleeping, and and including where I've been, a pretty good journal of my life. Adding to that, so my house can tell me quite a lot about when I was in the house, about how I was moving around, turning the lights on and off, and adjusting the temperature. It's getting to the point where certainly the house gets far enough to know when I'm going to be, when I'm there, because after all, this knows when I'm getting close, so now I can program this to when I get within a certain radius of the house, like 100 miles, to make sure it should be warm enough for me. So bit by bit, there's lots of ways in which I want this world of data to know a lot about me, because there's so much stuff that it could then do with it that I won't have to do, and I can move on to being more creative and get the. So what I'm interested in is personal data integration and using the power of that personal data for myself, as opposed to worrying about who else is using it for their nefarious things.
So I could just, if I could just jump in, I'm also very excited about my data. I'm also excited about how I can improve the way I live with my data, so take my data. But the other side I wanted to add to what you said, Tim, is that we are now developing technologies to give people control over who accesses the data and how. And so with these new computational approaches to ensuring privacy, it will be very easy and very comfortable for people to give their data for whatever causes and greater good and personal objectives they have, while at the same time to ensure that the data is not used where people feel uncomfortable.
So in fact, at CSAIL, at the lab, there is we are starting a information privacy project, which is going to be a little group within a center within the lab. Danny White's is running, and he's a great proponent of accountable systems, putting accountable systems into government, so that make sure that people are accountable for the way they've used data.
Thank you for your question. Let's take the next question.
Hello, my name's Amadeus from Decatur. Really fascinating panel too. I had a question about the future of some of the limitations in hardware for robotics examples we saw. There were some really interesting examples of sort of swarming and plane landing like a bit like a bird, and it seems like there's a lot of software which is trying to recreate biological systems. So the future of these neural networks and machine learning, some really cool stuff like Google's Brain. So I think it seems like people have latched onto this idea of mimicking nature in software. What about hardware? Where have we got to in terms of biological inspired hardware? There's some great famous examples of mimicking hardware to the point where your robot doesn't work at all, where you have every kinematic, every joint, every link, every motor is in the same place as the biological counterpart, and you have a beautiful, beautiful robot that doesn't move. Is that me? So I think the inspiration, so for instance, if you take the Wildcat video from Boston Dynamics, it doesn't have every link in the same place that a cheetah robot would have every link, but its center of mass moves surprisingly. The ground reaction forces are surprisingly similar to what a cheetah runs. So it's at that level of abstraction where we take the governing principles of biology, but skew them towards the hardware that we're good at building. And so cheetah actually has more power available at the joints than a biological cheetah. And we should have we should be able to do better than animals in a lot of cases, but we have to build the hardware differently. So it's not a pure mimic, it's bio-inspiration instead of biomimicry is the trend. Thanks for the question.
Questions for Tim. To protect freedom and access to information, would you recommend to be better to apply these policy and maybe technology changes to our existing internet, or are there fundamental changes that could happen to the internet that would change the playing field altogether and create a way better internet?
Do you mean should we reinvent a new internet?
Exactly.
No, we can. The internet is constantly.
Somebody else.
The internet is constantly in a way being reinvented. Look, there has been a huge problem with that, and we're trying to get people to move on to IPv6 from IPv4, partly because it was a step change. But HTTP, for example, is being continually, there will be quite a step change with HTTP2, which is sort of very much rethought, much more sort of real-time binary protocol. But HTTP has been changing just by addition of new headers, and it's been tweaking. So in a way, it's really important to preserve the existing structure. It's not going to be from a dramatic change in the protocols that we're going to get privacy or something. Well, we're going to, moving to lots of encryption, but the encryption is largely there. So you should be using HTTPS, rather than HTTP. You should be using SSL. I use PGP. Hands up. Anybody who uses PGP encryption on an email? A few, getting there. If the person does, the next to you does, and you don't, ask them about it afterwards. Because, so one of the things that we need to do is to use the stuff which is already there, like PGP, make it much more easy for normal people to use. In the case of GPG particularly, GPG and PGP. In order to resist for example, governments doing the wrong thing, we have to work on the governments. We have to put pressure on them. We have to change the laws. We have to establish sort of a non-national constitution and Bill of Rights of the Internet. And there's no quick technical fix to the fact that the Internet is being spied on.
Thank you. Let's take the next question.
My name's Jeff, and I'm dovetailing off of that a little bit. Considering that it's taken 25 years to get this current state of infrastructure, where do you see things coming together so that we're not relying on telephony and there's an ability to get to 4K, things like that? And will we be reliant on telephone companies to provide the service with so many municipalities not being able to, lay down the pipe for fiber, etc.?
Okay, so that's a very big question. Will we be reliant on telephone companies? It's really important at every layer in the internet, at the sort of the connectivity layer and the content layer, that there are independent markets and also independent from the device layer. So I can buy a device from one place, I can completely separately choose my internet connectivity and choose which movies I watch and which shoes I buy. So keeping those separate and keeping each market so that it is a really competitive market is important. The last mile, which she mentioned, will we be stuck with phone companies? Well, the town where I live, the electricity company is just going into internet provision. So, because there wasn't enough, people felt that there wasn't enough competition in the phone companies delivering internet over the last mile. Other companies can get into that. So large nameless internet companies and search companies, for example, even can get into providing internet. So I think it's really important that we don't assume that we have to rely on the existing telcos for supplying our internet. It's important that they're challenged by all kinds of new business models and new companies at every stage.
And you see that changing over time? Getting away from that?
The question is, do you see that changing?
Do I see it? I see the whole, it can be changed in lots of different ways, and how it changes is up to us. It's not clear how it's going to.
All right, thank you, Tim and Jeff. Next question.
Thank you guys so much. Can you describe a bit about the future as far as the type and nature of jobs that will exist in the future when robots become well and truly ubiquitous? Can you speak to that a little bit?
So I'm happy to. Maybe I'll let Daniela's also a roboticist. Let her field it first.
So we are very excited about working on the next generation robots that will help people in manufacturing, and that will bring manufacturing back in the U.S. And we imagine a world where workers will be able to synthesize the robot for any task using computational tools and easy interfaces. a kind of a robokinkos, if you will, where instead of printing your poster, you will be printing your robot to solve that particular task on demand at the time when you need the task. But the robots cannot be fully in control of the factory. People will still be in charge. The robots will be available to help people. And in my dream, I would like to see a manufacturing environment where we change from designed in the US and fabricated in China to designed in the US, customized at home in your living room by yourself and fabricated locally.
I totally agree. So the first robot revolution happened right around the 1980s, where the Puma robots came out and revolutionized factory robotics, right? And if you look at the automotive industry just before that happened and just after it happened, we were producing basically after 5 or 10 years, we were producing twice as many cars, but we were also employing 15% more people to make those cars work, right? So every time we've had a huge technology leap, it's been good for people, it's been good for jobs. The challenge is going to be educating people so that they can work with the robots. And the next level of technology leap, we have to work right into the education system. We have to teach people computer science and robotics when they're young. So Dean Kamen, the first robotics team is here, at South by Southwest, and I just think this is so important for the future to make this transition happen.
Thank you for that question. Next question.
Hi, good morning. I have a follow-up question on that and then a question on internet policy. So my question on the previous question was, do you see that as we start introducing technology like driverless cars, you can very much see where the taxi industry might become quickly obsolete once that happens. How do you see markets where manual labor or entry-level jobs will be affected by robotics, and how that might change?
I think you're right. I think that's a tough question. I think people's jobs will ultimately change, right? But I think in the short term, it's important for us to embrace the technology, make policy so that people can explore this technology, and educate people so they can make the transition. But I think some jobs, will inevitably change. I think the self-driving cars are going to take time. It's going to take a while. They're not as close as it might feel watching YouTube. But I hope that I'll be reading a book next time when I'm in a car in 20 years instead of being stressed out behind the wheel.
Can I just jump in to re-emphasize that the jobs will not change with the flip of a button. They don't change instantly. It will take some time. And so the question is, how do we retrain to go along with this transition? And hopefully during this transition, the jobs will become more exciting and more interesting for all of us. Just like what we experienced with the agricultural revolution and with the industrial revolution.
Excellent. Yeah, as a follow-up on that, I think it'd be worthwhile thinking as a community, how can we institute training for people who are just entering the job market on how they can move on from a market that perhaps is being replaced by newer technology and help them in their transition.
So that's a good question, and here is a dream. What if every high school kid in this country learned how to program in high school? Wouldn't that be really cool?
Yes, I'm a big proponent of that.
It's just as important as reading and arithmetic, right?
It's because
and not just because we need more programmers, but because we need the people who are lawyers and politicians to know how to program so that they can understand what's possible with technology.
Exactly.
Yes.
So in the 21st century, I believe that programming is as important as reading, writing, and calculating, doing math.
Yes. Yes.
Do we have some programmers in the audience?
Oh. And even you mentioned for lawyers as well, that to have a foundation of technology, and as a manager as well, I think it's really important for managers to also understand technology if they're working with technology.
We should keep going.
Yes. All right. So my follow-up question was.
Why don't you join the back of the queue?
Oh, okay.
If we have time, then we'll get to you again.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much for the great talk. So actually, Professor Law, touched this subject a little bit with the financial data, but my question is, do you think we can actually make a balance between censorship and privacy, and sometimes because they conflict? So, and who should do this? You know, like who should be the agency or media to do this, to make this balance?
Well, so I think that's a very important question that you raise, and I was actually going to bring it up when Tim was talking a bit about the data that is on the internet, all about him. I think that there's a lot of benefits to having all of your data out there, but your question really is about potential costs. And let me give you one example, and then I'll tell you what I think we can do about it. If I were an insurance company, I would love to get that data that Tim has on his app with his accelerometer, because I'd like to know how fast he drives, I'd like to know where he goes, I'd like to know what his health condition is, because once I find out all that information, I may decide to refuse to insure him, because he's not a good risk.
No way about it.
And this is the problem. It's that when your data is out there, it can be used in ways that are unanticipated. And this is why I think Tim's point about new legislation is so critical. We don't have legislation to protect our privacy and to prevent the misuse of data, because frankly, when the founders of our country were framing the Constitution, they didn't really understand the notion of data and privacy. So I think that with better legislation, and legislation is going to have to come from the people, you're going to have to write your congressman and say, this is an important issue, we want you to be at the front of it and not at the back. I think that that's going to be a critical part of what's going to happen over the next 5 or 10 years.
So you think someone should be able to censor data which is out there because it's violates someone's privacy?
I think that censorship is very different from preserving privacy, and I think this has to do with individual rights. In other words, you have the right not to share your data with me, but nobody should have the right to limit our free speech. Those are two very different things, and I think that right now the law does not reflect that distinction, and we need to have better legislation to deal with those issues.
So thank you for that question. We're officially out of time. So let me suggest that those of you who haven't had your question answered, join us at the podium. And before that, let's thank the speakers one more time.